Hello, friends. I want to share a few comments with you today based on Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 2 through 30. In verses 7 through 14, we have Israel's homecoming, her triumphal return. Notice verse 8. God will bring his people back from the land of the north. This is Assyria, to which Israel was deported in 721 BC. The caravan that will return will consist of the lame, the blind, the pregnant, and those with child. This will be a further sign of the miraculous nature of their return. And notice the reference to Israel's father and to Ephraim, my firstborn, in verse 9. This is significant because the term father, as you may already know, is very rarely used to refer to God in the Old Testament. That's one reason why it's such a shock to us, and must have been a shock to the Jews of Jesus' day, when he encouraged his people to pray, "Our Father who art in heaven." That was a new idea. The people who will return will be metaphorically like a well-watered garden, never to languish again. I like that metaphor in verse 12, how picturesque it is. And the weeping of verse 9, God will turn into joy and gladness, verse 13. Such hope in that passage. In verses 15 through 22, we read about the end of Rachel's mourning. Now, according to 1 Samuel chapter 10, Rachel's tomb was near there. Jeremiah is imagining the spirit of Rachel weeping for her children who had been deported by the Assyrians about 100 years earlier, when he writes in verse 15, "A voice is heard in Ramah. Rachel is weeping for her children." And you may remember that this idea of Rachel, the personified Israel, weeping for her children, was taken up in the New Testament. Do you remember where? Matthew chapter 2. Where we learn that this passage is used in connection with Herod's slaughter of the children 2 years and under in Bethlehem, when Herod was trying to destroy the baby Jesus. Verse 20 is the Lord's reply to the cry of repentance in the previous verses. In this verse and the verses that follow, the Lord is reassuring Ephraim of his deep longing for Ephraim's return to him. And don't you like that term of endearment, the child in whom I delight? That's what he calls Ephraim. In essence, he says, Ephraim is my darling child. And the Hebrew text in the last line of this verse literally reads, "My bowels rumble for him." This depicts God's stomach being churned up with longing for his son. We can apply that verse all day long, can't we? God has such a deep longing for us, and even for those who may not be considered as the children in whom he presently delights, but he longs for their return. Finally, let me say just a word about verses 29 and 30. Jeremiah is affirming here that in the future, people would no longer complain about the injustice implied in this proverb. The parents have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. It's absurd when you think about it, that the children's teeth would be set on edge because their parents eat sour grapes. Well, only the man who sinned could be expected to suffer for his sin. And so Jeremiah is talking about personal responsibility in this passage. And this is as good a place as any to talk about application and bring an end to this video. Surely the wrongdoing of one person may have repercussions in his own family for years to come. Our children and our grandchildren may indeed suffer for the wrongdoing that we commit. And this truth may well prompt us to attend to our decisions and our actions, to watch them carefully, because we don't want our misdeeds and our misjudgments to severely impact our children and grandchildren. We don't want that, do we? And so we are reminded again to take very seriously our responsibility to be a good influence on future generations and to watch how we ourselves live, knowing that we can impact future generations in a negative way. On the other hand, here in these verses is the principle of individual responsibility rather than collective responsibility. That is, each new generation and each individual has the power to choose. If we come from a home that did not honor God, that does not mean that we are destined to dishonor God. We have the power to choose. We may choose for ourselves which road we are going to take, and there is wonderful power in that recognition. I am responsible for myself. I'm not going to bear the sins and the punishment of past generations. I have the power to choose to serve God and be faithful to Him. On that note, I think we'll close, except to say that I will probably see you in just a few days, Lord willing, as we discuss together Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 through 34, and the promise of a new covenant. And every verse in those verses is just so full of meaning. I know you're going to enjoy reading about this tomorrow. And I'll see you in a few days. God bless.